Hi, everyone. First, I want to thank Lucia and the whole Talking Galleries team for bringing me to Barcelona and inviting me to be here today. So my name is JiaJia Fei. I'm a digital strategist and the director of digital at the Jewish Museum in New York. And today I'm going to talk to you about social media. So I've been working in museums for the last decade, specifically in the realm of digital. And my job addresses the question of how technology can be used to solve problems as a design solution so that institutions can help make art more accessible and reach more people. To most people, these are some of the frequently said keywords when I tell them my title is the director of digital. But to clarify, my job is not in the business of creating products or shiny objects or implementing technology for the sake of technology. Rather, I see my role as a translator, an interpreter, storyteller, and problem solver, using the tools of our time, technology, to further our mission at the museum. And why do we need translation in the art world? It's because we tend to use a lot of language that's very inaccessible. And I'm sorry, all of our press releases and wall texts make no sense. But at the same time, when speaking about technology, we use language that can be just as alienating. And so as museum technologists, we have to be fluent in both art and technology. The concept of technology in museums is also a bit of a paradox. Technology is new, but museums are not. And museums are also not technology companies. We're not startups. Whereas innovation in technology is constantly moving forward and looking towards the future, the mission of museums is to preserve objects and better understand the past. Yet, for the first time in the history of art, a work of art is seen online before it's ever experienced in person. As a millennial, I grew up on the internet, and my first experience on the web was circa 1996 in an AOL chat room with dial-up. And this experience is known as Web 1.0, or the World Wide Web. So this is an internet that's completely not connected in terms of interactivity. There's lots of information, but it was also painfully slow. Then there was Web 2.0, the social web. Facebook launched in my first year of school in college, and as you may or not recall, it began as a social network just for college students, which later expanded into high school students and then the rest of the world. On Web 2.0, everyone could self-publish a blog and therefore self-identify as a blogger, and then everyone became a curator. It's estimated that between the year 2000 and 2015, the number of internet users went from 700 million to 3 billion, producing an unprecedented amount of data. Something like 90% of the world's data was created in the last few years. The internet also presented unprecedented possibilities for connection and democratization. There were moments of optimism where social media could amass the power to bring down governments, such as in the Arab Spring around 2010, but it soon turned dark. In 2013, Edward Snowden informed the world that our governments had been spying on us using all the data that we've been collecting all this time on these platforms. And yet all of its users, all of us, continued to sacrifice security for convenience and gave away all of our data to platforms like Twitter and Instagram, and then Facebook, who later bought Instagram, and then WhatsApp and Oculus Rift. And then this data was used to target and control public opinion in a perfectly choreographed strategy to influence the US presidential election of 2016, and something we're still dealing with. So what began as a gesture of optimism to connect the world ended where we are today, the heart of darkness. So now we're entering a new paradigm shift. It's called Web 3. This leads us to the cusp of what's happening now, a decentralized web. Web 3 is a direct response to Web 2.0, a more human-centered, privacy-enabled internet to counter the power structures like Facebook that have stolen our data. The antithesis of these massive corporations produces decentralized platforms like the blockchain, which we'll learn about later on in Tim's presentation, and things like virtual private networks. And the impact of how the entire internet reaches the world is huge. Today, there are more individual users on Facebook than there are in the population of China and India. So what about the next 4 billion people? Where will the next great digital battleground take place? So here are a couple headlines from 2018 that have clearly defined the trajectory of where we're going. So one of the biggest stories in tech last year was, of course, the staggering breach of private user data that Facebook shared with its advertisers, on top of serving as a platform for foreign entities to influence public opinion in elections. We also saw across the world that brick and mortar businesses fell to the convenience of e-commerce. Stores were constantly shutting down because of platforms like Amazon and things that became very automated. And then straight from an episode of Black Mirror, governments have leveraged facial recognition software and artificial intelligence in China within their rule of law, so that when you jaywalk, they take a picture of your face and then text you a ticket. So when I think about how technology has impacted human behavior, I think about this quote that I read from Ev Williams, who's the co-founder of Twitter. He said, "We often think the internet enables you to do new things, but people just want to do the same things they've already done. Take a human desire, preferably one that's been around for a really long time, identify that desire, and use modern technology to take out the steps." So when you apply this logic to most things that you see, every major corporation on the web, it checks out. So if you want to go shopping, you go on Amazon. If you want to order a car, you fire up your Uber app, except in Barcelona. So painful. But within the creative industry, if you look at publishing, cinema, music, all of these industries have found ways to cut out the steps and create a singular product, whether it's Netflix, iTunes, Spotify, that meets that singular human desire, except for art. What is it about the art world that prevents this? Why are we so damn slow? How come no one has figured this out? And perhaps one of the answers, which was addressed earlier, was the fact that perhaps art is just too nuanced and complex and simply can't be replicated and translated. So there's still to this day nothing you can do on the web, particularly with VR. I personally get very nauseous when I put on a VR headset. That can reproduce a 4-channel video installation, or the experience of looking up really, really close in front of a painting to see an artist's hand. But perhaps by complete accident, unintentionally, it's been to our advantage that this hasn't happened yet. So what's happened to all these other industries that have automated into a singular solution? Netflix took down Blockbuster, DVDs, movie theaters. Amazon and e-readers have closed bookstores. Yet art museums, and I would also argue art fairs, art galleries, within that equation, thanks to our own resistance to technology and people like Beyonce, attendance is at a record high. You saw kind of earlier today too, the notion of the proliferation of art fairs, galleries really expanding and monopolizing all over the world, and people continuing to go to museums even if they see that work of art on Instagram. And so the phenomenon kind of goes further. It's extended to even fake museums on social media. This is the bane of my existence. So these food museums, museum of ice cream, pizza, egg, whatever, they've become, this is the greatest headline, the greatest monument to brand hellscapes of 2018. And it's because we live in an experience economy. When people see a work of art on Instagram, they want to go to there and have that experience themselves. It will never, ever replace the in-person experience. And I get that question all the time when we try to do things like digitizing our collection. People ask, will this replace the act of people coming to the museum? And that is never going to be the case. So what's next? Here are 10 technology trends that I've identified and what they mean for the art world. The first one is the fact that data is now the oil of the 21st century. It both needs to be mined, and it's in the control of a very limited amount of entities in the world. And at the same time, the value of data is vastly underestimated and easily hacked. Last year, Marriott experienced one of the biggest data breaches in history, something like 300 million guest accounts of anyone who's ever stayed at a Marriott hotel was released. Raise your hand if you got that email. Really? A lot of people I know got it. But maybe you guys don't stay in Marriott hotels. And it's really a matter of time at this point until something like this, a massive data breach, heads into the art world. And how do we prevent future hacks from happening? The answer is you hire nerds to take out other nerds. Who are the next CTOs and CDOs of the art world? You may have heard the term CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, your IT person. But how many of you have Chief Data Officers? In response to the sea change of technology, staffing structures must be as responsive. So number 2, video killed the social media post. For anyone who manages Facebook business pages, you might as well stop publishing unless you pay to play. Organic posts on Facebook currently reach less than 2% of your total following, which means you have to buy ads on Facebook. You have to give them your data. And for your content to be seen, everything needs to be paid. And what if you don't have a budget? Redistribute that full page in art forum that's seen by 10 people. And what are the most successful ads right now on Facebook? It's video. People now watch more video on Facebook than on YouTube. With 5G coming later this year, the new data network, this changes everything. So on the new data network, the speed of downloading a movie, which used to take 6 minutes on your phone with 4G, will now take 17 seconds. Number 3, swipe is the new scroll. As more and more online engagement becomes mobile, our interfaces will also change. And I know immediately all of you thought about Tinder. With mobile, swiping is now the more natural gesture when it comes to user experience and UX, whereas the scroll was designed for your computer, for desktop. And this doesn't only apply to Tinder. Some of you may have also noticed by accident that Instagram released a new horizontal scrolling interface, which got removed, and they claim that it will no longer be released, but we shall see. But this is the trend of the future. Number 4, the rise of the super app. Can someone tell me what this is? Raise your hand if you're on WeChat. It's a lot of people. So in China, out of 1.4 billion people who live there, 1 billion are all on WeChat. And it's not just a social networking app. It's a super app, and it does all of these things. It's the app that every other app wants to be, that your Western phone does not do in a single platform. You can talk to your friends, order food, order a car, book a doctor's appointment, all on one single platform. And all other apps have WeChat envy. It's the app that we're in, the situation we're in right now is because of capitalism, we're able to allow multiple businesses to compete with each other. And so when I want to order a car, there are multiple apps that I can select from, whereas in China, there's only one. And with a data sample as significant as 1 billion people, the ability to iterate and constantly bring up new software is unprecedented. So, of course, there's no substitute for WeChat. Now let's talk about useless apps. In 2010, Apple coined the term, there's an app for that, because there literally was an app for every single thing, including every art museum and major gallery. And I apologize if your app is on this screen because no one's using it. I used to work at the Guggenheim. It's a mistake. But what happened to all of those apps? For every iPhone sold, we download a ton of apps. The average person downloads 119 apps on their device, but less than 25% of those apps are used in any given month. Most apps lose 77% of their user base within 3 days of download, and our top 5 apps take up 80% of our time. So this is my phone. As you can see, I spend a lot of time on Instagram and no time on art apps. So we're also becoming an increasingly cashless society. In America, we have, and here as well, multiple ways of digitizing our payments through companies like PayPal, Apple Pay, Venmo. But if you examine a technologically advanced society, again, like China, cash is becoming completely obsolete. So when I visit China these days, it's becoming increasingly impossible to do anything without an app like WeChat or mobile payments. In fact, homeless people are begging for money on the street with QR codes. It's true. For artists, decentralized currencies like the blockchain offer incredible opportunities to do things like creating a sense of transparency, authentication, and provenance, but it's just the beginning. This is the first work of digital art ever purchased by a museum through Bitcoin. And this was purchased by MAK in Vienna, the Museum of Applied Arts. And it's a limited edition screensaver that was authenticated through blockchain, which is the same technology that Bitcoin uses to determine artwork attribution. It's also been predicted that artificial intelligence will displace 40% of the world's jobs in the next 15 years. Are you scared? And some of you have read recently that, as reported by Tim in the audience, Jeff Koons recently laid off a large number of his staff, largely because of automation and jobs that really have been delegated to machines. And for artists, take this painting, for example, which sold at Christie's. It's a work of art that was created by artificial intelligence, and it's through an algorithm, and it sold for over $400,000. Turning on to a more serious note, the nature of social media has also given a voice to people who were once afraid to speak. So the Me Too movement, as discussed earlier today by the women panel, was of course also impacted in the art world. And many of these aspects were amplified through sub-movements, such as this hashtag known as Not Surprised. And it used this image of Jenny Holzer's installation, calling attention to the fact that the abuse of power comes as no surprise. Also on social media, this feed on Instagram, Seen and Heard, is what I consider to be one of the bravest and most successful use cases of social media, calling attention to the power and abuse of power and sexual harassment in the Indian art world, especially, which is long overdue. So people send in anonymous comments which get posted here. And it's continuing to be updated to this day. I can't talk about viral media without talking about influencers. So influencers are, of course, social media users with a large internet following on platforms, especially like Instagram, paid to endorse a product. To reach a younger millennial audience, most advertisers and brands have decided it's actually more cost-effective to pay someone with 100,000 followers than to buy that ad in traditional advertising. But the latest trend is what's called micro-influencers or nano-influencers. And they're born out of the realization that perhaps some of these people with hundreds and thousands of followers are too difficult to work with and too expensive. So people with just a couple thousand followers now are being reached out to really push product on their platforms. But my favorite influencer story of the past year is this computer-generated influencer named Lil Miquela, who's accumulated over 1 million followers. And she's an influence that's been created by CGI. She's not a real person. And my final trend is very much related to this and also very personal. It's the running joke of social media as performance of identity. To me, it represents the peak of our complicity with misinformation in the digital age. We're all in on the joke. We all know that social media represents this very curated, selective representation of reality, yet we're perpetually fooled and we keep fueling the fire. So, as you all may know, the artist Amalia Ullman did this first in 2014. For several months, she put on a performance on Instagram called Excellences and Perfections, where she basically performed the identity of an it girl, posting pictures of herself and these curated lives that really foreshadowed the moment that we're living in now. And even though everything you saw looks fake, you continue to engage as if it were reality. And by creating this very consistent theme, this model is very easily replicated and consumable, and these identities can be built very easily. And here's an excellent example of that concept. Does everyone know who she is? Anna Delvey. So Anna Delvey was a socialite who infamously scanned a lot of people in the art world, hundreds and thousands of dollars, pretending to be a German heiress. And she was ultimately arrested and sent to jail, but lived out her performance of luxury through being this insider on Instagram and in real life. And this is one of the worst case scenarios. This documentary just came out recently on Netflix. And it really illustrates for those who aren't in on the joke, the abuse of power can be really devastating. So this is a music festival that happened in the Bahamas, completely sold by Instagram models, trying to launch this fantastic vacation and experience through models like Bella Hadid and Kendall Jenner, and it ended in a complete and utter disaster. And people ended up getting stuck on the island with no food, and this entire experience was created through the facade of social media. And I tried this out myself. For the first time in 8 years, I decided not to go to Art Basel Miami Beach, but I continued to post content from previous years. And you wouldn't believe how many people emailed me, "I saw that you're in Miami." So where do we go from here? We're living in an age of unprecedented access to art because of the internet and technology. But in art world years, it's lagged so far behind than other industries. We have a chance to recoup on the mistakes that the world at large has made. The art world is also one of the only industries in which for-profit lags behind nonprofit when it comes to technology. Think about that. And so as a practice, it's been said before as well, art is inherently a chance to slow down, to meditate, evaluate, and reevaluate. So as access to technology expands to the rest of the world, we can learn from its successes and its missteps and be very strategic about the next step. So the only thing that I do know for certain about the future is that the only constant is change. Thank you. Now you can all follow me on Instagram. Questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk and for being here with us today. I was just wondering, as you work for a museum, how about all of this data regarding to the museum example? Do you think a museum today that doesn't have a social platform is a museum that is not adequately?
Doesn't exist?
Yeah, basically. Thank you.
I think, so the question of data actually exists in two different realms. So social media is kind of the exterior presentation of one's brand online. And though we do collect data from things like that, there are privacy laws in place, and more so every day, that prevent the museum, the entity, the business from using that data. So what happens is, as a user, you're signing up for all these rules, and then platforms like Facebook will take your data and sell it back to you in some way as an ad. The other realm of data that's more important to institutions is the fact that you need a system to control it. So just to revisit Emmanuel's presentation from earlier today, does anyone know what that system is called? It's called a CRM. It stands for Customer Relationship Database. And if you don't have one of those, it's basically a system that collects all of your spreadsheets, collects all of the data from your businesses, your constituents, your customers, and brings it all together in an integrated way. So you're not connecting multiple spreadsheets. That dimension of data is something that institutions, all businesses, need to continue to leverage. And of course, there are also off-the-shelf solutions that you can all take advantage of. It doesn't have to be custom. You don't need 12 engineers to build it. But I think before any business and any gallery especially thinks about all of these other things that are very trendy, like AI, VR, AR, the key method of kind of continuing your understanding of how people are using information is managing that data. Yes.
I would like to pick up on Instagram. It has been talked last year, talking galleries, and just in the previous podium discussion, Instagram. Yesterday, I think I read an article about the feasibility of Artsy's business model, and that Artsy is probably going to disappear, maybe, because Instagram is the for-free version of Artsy. Okay, we are a small gallery. We have about 1,500 followers, of which somehow 500 are jewelry artists, even though we have absolutely nothing to do with jewelry, apart from one show per year. And I would say that the other 990 are other artists, and the remaining 10 are galleries. So there's not a single collector or potential art buyer who is following us. So I have basically disclosed it. I would like to hear what other galleries' experiences are, or what basically this fad about Instagram is, considering that I'm also spending most of my social media time on Instagram, and every fourth picture I see is an advertisement. So please elaborate a little bit on this and give us hope or whatever.
I know there's someone who works at Artsy here, so I'll represent on her behalf that it probably will not replace Instagram. So I think having the understanding that social media, any type of public digital branding, will not have an immediate KPI, key performance indicator like sales or traffic, is very important because, it depends on how you use it, absolutely, and what your goals are for success. But in the most of the case, it's about having a presence and being able to tell a story. I think when it comes to galleries, you're really small businesses, and I'm sure you don't have many resources to split among the people who are working, in the space versus publicity and all that stuff. But it's still valuable to have a presence. I think as a social media feed, you get as much as you put into it. And so by creating that story, through a content strategy, having authenticity, it kind of goes into the whole ecosystem of having some type of representation. So if you think about, Instagram being as critical as a search engine like Google, when I hear about something, the first thing I do is Google it. 50% of site traffic across the board comes through Google. And these days, when everyone is on this instead of your computer, you will now go into Instagram to search for that gallery. And if you're not there, in some ways you don't exist. Sorry.
I have a question kind of about the Instagram algorithm. So I know that the Instagram algorithm used to be chronological, and then I'm not sure when, but a few years ago, I'll say, it changed so that maybe I'll post something 20 minutes ago, and you'll post something an hour ago. But because I don't have as many followers as you, for instance, your post will be way up on other people's feeds here, but mine will be nowhere to be seen by anyone. And I think what's interesting about this in many ways is that sort of originally we're talking about democratizing the art world. And what does that mean? That means that I can be seen by anybody, or like if I have a gallery, that everyone will see my work just as much as they'll see your work. But then increasingly it seems like that's no longer the case because of the way this algorithm is working. So I think it's kind of interesting to address this kind of issues.
Yeah, and that algorithm is completely because they want you to buy ads. So if you think about it, the only content that comes in chronologically on your computer or device these days is your email. Nothing else is chronological by time. So of course, Facebook did it first, and then Twitter, and then Instagram. Facebook, of course, owns Instagram. It's the same advertising platform. If you need to buy an ad on Instagram, you do it through Facebook now. And again, it's because they're asking you to pay to play. To be able to use these services for free, you're giving away data, but then you're also leveraging that data to be able to hyper-target your audience. And so as an advertiser, say I have $100 to spend, I can't buy any ads with $100, but I can target by zip code interest what other people are following on Instagram. And I know my content will reach that person. So that's really the value and kind of what you have to give up in response.
Hi. You were talking about the fact that people don't really use native art apps. Does that mean that apps like Instagram are going to continue to enforce their stranglehold on, the way people view art?
I would put that in a different category. So by native art apps, I meant like when you go to a museum, I'm not going to use that museum app. No one's going to download an app because most people are just going to use the apps they already use. So I think this was a trend that was happening a few years ago where everyone decided, to like create content and create apps because everyone is downloading apps. We have to create our own. But the truth is most people are continuing to use apps like Instagram or Google, social media, and their phone, their camera. They're not going to use the proprietary app of the museum that they're going into to receive content.
Because it's just, having lots of extra apps which you're just not going to...
That you're going to use once.
You're going to use it once and never again.
And now really the trend is creating web-based content. So when all websites are now mobile friendly, you can continue to serve either audio or video, whatever you were going to put in that app on your website, mobile.
At the beginning of your presentation, you made some very interesting brief comments about Web3. But for the rest of your presentation, you were talking very much about the evolution of what are Web2 platforms.
There's another presentation after this about blockchain. So I'm not going to...
Could you give us just one or two brief hints at maybe whether actually Web2 will be supplanted by something which we could recognize as potentially a Web3 model? Or are we doomed to the dominance of, or the increasing power and influence of what are essentially centralizing platform models as opposed to decentralizing ones?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the instances I talked about, like using blockchain to authenticate works of art is a very good use case. It's hard to say at this point because it's so early and also really encapsulates such a broad user base. How much of that transition is going to be quick? And I think people are still trying to navigate. So I don't have all the answers, unfortunately. Any other questions?
Hello. I wanted to know your opinion in regards to how important social events are, like networking and such, going hand in hand with the social media world. But how important is networking, in your opinion?
So one instance I can think of is there was a trend a few years ago of producing these Instameets. Are you referring to those?
Yeah, there's like meetings for new entrepreneurs or meetings for just anything specific. Like it could be art or business, but just meetings outside of the social media world, just to network.
I think this is networking.
Yes, I agree. And so
We're all here.
I want to know your opinion in regards to the importance of it or how much influence it truly has, because we tend to forget regular interactions, and everything is becoming so technology based. So keeping that liveliness of meeting in person, I'd like to know your opinion about that.
Yeah, I think there's a reason why we're all here. And I think particularly when you look at attendance in museums, the fact that more and more people are going to galleries and art fairs around the world, technology and being able to have a very quick comment on a platform has not replaced experience and in-person conversation and discourse. So I think it's very clear in the metrics that people continue to have in-person experiences. And, you have the ease of being able to connect with people all over the world through platforms like social media, but the end goal has always been to have this physical on-site interaction.
Yes, I agree. I hope it stays that way too.
Hi, I was just curious about what you think about the innovative technology being used in the Gulf. For instance, Abu Dhabi with the Louvre, they launched this billboard guided tours on the highway, so with using radio connection as well. I don't know if you know about that. Whether you think that's something as a one-off or it's going to be developed elsewhere.
I haven't seen it yet. What is it exactly?
It's basically, it was for the launch of the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and basically the billboards along the highway from, I don't know if it's from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, but one of the main highways. If you had your radio tuned to a certain frequency, it would automatically pick up the billboards, and you would get a 30-second, you get an image.
I think that's Bluetooth. Yeah.
Okay.
So has anyone seen that David Bowie show that was traveling through America? So the exhibition design was pretty similar. So you can use beacons to connect to different devices so that as you walk by, it's location-based positioning. It'll deliver content to your phone. I think that's what that is.
Maybe, yeah.
But yeah. I think for interactive exhibitions, so the David Bowie example is a very smart use of technology because, of course, it was a music exhibition, and kind of the balance of audio versus physical ephemera made it an applicable use of technology in that case. Anyone else? Thank you.